Hello and welcome. My name is Lexi Jong, and today we're taking a look at SUQQU Pre-Summer Sunflower Wonder Collection Part 2. So I have a Part 1 video and I'll leave that linked down below in the description box, but that features pretty much the majority of the collection. All of those items were sent to me in PR. Thank you so much to SUQQU for sharing those with me. And then the two eyeshadow quads, those were not included, so I purchased those on my own. So between the two videos, we have everything in the collection. The entire collection is limited edition and it's based on the sunflower. And today we are going to be doing some eye swatches, eye demos, arm swatches, comparisons, and so forth. So let's go ahead and take a look. We'll start off with the packaging here. So the SUQQU Signature Color Eye Palettes, these all come with the glossy black plastic. We have a full-size mirror in here. There is a little plastic card that goes on top, and we have two utensils as well. The two utensils look like this. So we have a double-ended brush and a double-ended foam tip applicator, one larger side and one skinnier side on each. So the two palettes, again, are inspired by sunflowers, and not just the literal sense of a sunflower, but all the feelings and emotions that can be evoked with sunflowers and seeing them in the air and so forth. So here is palette 1, 2, 3. And obviously you've got the yellow, which makes you think of sunflowers. But if you've seen those pink sunflowers, they're kind of like a lighter pink. That palette reminds me of those as well. My neighbor has some of them and they are like taller than me. They're incredible looking. And then this here is palette 1, 2, 4. And this reminds me more of like the stem and the leaves, even like a little bit. You can see this here has like a light blue shimmer kind of waving in the sky and so forth. So let's start off with some arm swatches and then we'll move on to eye swatches and talk a little bit about the palettes. So the SUQQU palettes typically follow a general formula where the first shade here is going to be a very light shimmer. It doesn't really give off a ton of color. However, I do think that the two included here, if you wanted to do one of those looks that kind of highlights so that's 2 layers. If you want to do a look that kind of highlights, a colored eyeliner, I think the sparkle shades on both palette 1, 2, 3 and 1, 2, 4 give off just enough color to keep it really light and shimmery, but there's still a little something there. So this is going to be kind of a very soft petal pink shimmer. Next up, we have the soft pink here, and it almost looks like a matte in the pan, but it's actually going to be a satin. You can see that satin sheen there, and you can see it's going to be a warm tone, like peachy pink. More pink than peach, but it definitely has those peach tones in there. And then next up, we have the bright yellow shade. And this is a really nice shade because you can make this really intense, but you can also kind of make that a very, very soft yellow as well if you buff that out or apply it with a brush. And I'll show you that in the demos. And then our last shade, and that's going to be more of a matte, but you can see there is a little bit of a sheen there. It's kind of like a matte with a subtle shimmer. And then our last shade here, this is going to be kind of this aubergine shade and really beautiful shade. You've got some plum. It's kind of like, like a true plum where you see like the hints of red and everything in there with just a hint of purple. That's kind of what we're looking at. And I think it's a really beautiful shade here. So this is palette 1, 2, 3. And I have to say, I really like this palette. And it kind of pleasantly surprised me because the yellow really did kind of scare me, but I really like it. So 1, 2, 4, we have this shade here. So it looks sky blue here, but you can see there's definitely kind of like a little bit of a minty vibe. So when you actually shear this out, it's really going to be a little bit more green, but it's almost aqua. There's not quite enough blue to say it's aqua, but a little bit. Next, we have this mossy spring green shade, and you can see there's definitely going to be like some yellow undertones in there. So it's kind of that warm, in between moss and spring green. It's not quite as vibrant for a true spring green. And then next up, we have more of this bright like grass green. And really pretty shade. That's a pretty balanced green in my opinion. And then the last shade here, this is kind of like a chocolate brown, but we have some green sparkle in there. Now, when you're applying that shade with a brush, you're not really going to see the sparkle much, but if you tap it on with a finger, you will be able to see a bit of that sparkle. So you can see that this brown here is going to be a neutral brown, but it leans slightly cool. And I think overall both palettes are really great. And I think they nailed the challenge. This definitely reminds me of sunflowers. Now, before we move on to the eye swatches and the demos, I just want to present two of the Tone Touch eyes. These were included in my first video. So Tone Touch eyes are SUQQU's single shadows, and they came out with cream shadows for the first time. These are limited edition, and I wanted to bring these up because these are fantastic as a base. I'm going to put these on my hand. They are more like a stiffer putty-like texture. You can definitely kind of spread those out and disperse it, but they really help the shadows adhere well. And I did use both of these. So that was 112, this is 113. I used both of these in the demos, so you'll see those in just a second. And those are them. Actually, in the look I have on right now, I have 112 underneath the shadows. All right, so we're gonna start off with eye swatches of each of these shadows. So for each shade in the quads, I put them on my eyes individually so you can really see the colors. And I used the Synergy Soft Shader to apply the shadows to my right eye. And I use finger application for the left eye. And you can see that obviously finger application is going to give you a little bit of a deeper color, a little bit of a stronger look versus the soft shader, which is really going to give you a more, a softer look to it. So particularly with some of the deeper shades like that yellow shade there. And I have to say all of the shades and actually all SUQQU shadows go on beautifully. They have this really beautiful silky texture. It's kind of similar to Surratt, but they're a little bit silkier than the Surratt shadows. And, I have to say, I can never get enough of SUQQU Cosmetics. I absolutely love their products. And the quads are both 6.2 grams of product. They do have a 1-year shelf life. And I have to say mine have stayed great longer than a year. And just like all SUQQU products, they are made in Japan. Now, just a little bit about SUQQU and their numbering system in general. So this is true for the eyeshadow palettes, blushes, lipsticks, and so forth. And basically, if you see a number anywhere between 0 and 99, that is going to be something that's in the permanent line. They do create their products numerically. So for example, right now in the eyeshadow palettes, I think we're up to like 13 or 14. And then anything that's over 100 is always limited edition. And again, they'll go numerically from there. So these are palettes 123 and 124. So we have had 24 limited edition palettes at this point since this formula has, launched. Now, according to SUQQU, the signature color eyes, it says SUQQU's iconic eyeshadow palette gives exquisitely refined colors for lustrous eyes for a simple basic look with a touch of refinement. Designed to adhere closely and seamlessly, its color quite simply becomes one with the eyelid. Blendable and buildable color pay off with a blissfully smooth texture. And, I think the key in that particular paragraph there is how it becomes one with the eyelid. I find that to be really true. It's a powder and it not quite as much as the melting powder blushes, but it does almost seem to melt into your eyelids a little bit. They stay true all day. There's no fading, there's no creasing. You really can't go wrong with the SUQQU formula, in my opinion. Now, in regards to this particular collection, it says a combination of subdued, vibrant, rich colors with darker shades to define your eyes creates a sophisticated look for early summer. In 2 limited colors, a warmer color inspired by sunflower petals and a cooler color inspired by sunflower leaves. These vivid color blend beautifully with the skin. So 1, 2, 3, you've got your sun yellow and warm pink. And it says it's a palette of warm colors inspired by sunflower petals, a perfect pairing of yellow gold with reduced brightness, combined with a more shadowy tone to create a complete balanced makeup look. As for 124, it's sage green and light olive. This palette of smoky green colors is inspired by sunflower leaves to create a chic and stylish look. And I have to say, you know, both palettes really kind of blew me away. You know, looking at pictures of the SUQQU pre-summer collection, which this is, and then the summer collection, which is coming out it's coming out in May. So end of April, the pre-order should open up. If you're interested in pre-ordering from Selfridges, I'll leave that information down below in the description box. But, you know, looking at the palettes between both of those collections, I was initially drawn more to the summer collection than the pre-summer collection. And I have to say, actually seeing these in person, I am totally impressed. And now I'm like, I don't know, they might look prettier in the pictures, but I don't know if they can beat these in real life. I really like both of these palettes. And I think you get these beautiful soft looks, and you know, they're colorful, but they're not like in your face color unless you want to make them that way. And that's one of the great things about SUQQU. They are truly buildable products. Now, in regards to each of these palettes, starting off with 123, I have to say I really actually like all of the shades in here. And again, I really didn't think I would use the yellow too much. And it might not be something that I would use every day with this particular palette, but I think, you know, people who are great at liquid eyeliner and doing some of those graphic eye looks, having this bold yellow with a finger application and then using like a black eyeliner, you could get really gorgeous. I mean, can you imagine even making like a bumblebee on your eyelid to celebrate, you know, something ecological? I think that would just be something really fun and cool to do. The pink, I'm not the biggest pink eyeshadow fan, but that soft pink in the upper right-hand corner, that is just like the perfect pink for my particular skin tone. So I have a fair neutral skin tone, and I feel like this pink is like perfect as a base. It really just works beautifully. And the shimmer, you know, if you add that on top, it works really well with it. I think those two are probably my favorite in this particular palette. I really love those together, but I really like that pink even just on its own. Like that's definitely something I'll keep reaching for, even just like as an eye base in general. So I think it's really gorgeous. And as I mentioned during the arm swatches, the sparkle, the pink sparkle in palette 123 and the greenish sparkle in 124, those two both have a little bit more color than the average sparkle shades in the SUQQU palettes. So they are just great as a look all on their own. You can put an eye base down, put the sparkle on top, and then maybe a graphic eyeliner, or, you know, just go with that. You can get a very light, soft look. I either use like a very soft smudged eyeliner or some sort of pretty colored eyeliner. I think they are gorgeous on their own that way as well. The aubergine color, kind of that like reddish plum kind of shade there, I think that is also a really pretty color. You can dab that on softly to get a bit of depth with the pink shade. Or, you know, this can make a really nice dramatic shade on its own. It also works really well with the yellow for something a little bit deeper. I particularly like having this brighter yellow as an accent shade. I think it works really well that way. Moving on to palette 124, the shimmer in here, as I mentioned, it's actually kind of like this minty green shimmer, but there's a touch of aqua kind of mixed in there. It looks like almost like a sky blue in the pan, but it really is more green. I think it's really pretty, and I have to say SUQQU has not done too many greens. The greens that they've had kind of mixed in randomly in their palettes are nothing like these greens. They are kind of like deeper, you know, forest greens and things like that. This is such a nice palette from SUQQU, something different from what they usually do. And I love having these brighter greens that are very soft in pigmentation. They blend out beautifully, and I think the level of pigmentation in these makes these so wearable with a variety of other palettes as well, to kind of just add something a little different. And I really like the way these go on. So that mossy green, that mossy olive shade, that is a really nice warm tone light shade. And I think it actually blends very nicely with the soft pink from the 123 palette. I really like the two of those together. Kind of gives you a little bit of a flower vibe just using those two as well. But I have to say, my favorite in this palette are the two bottom shades. So I love kind of this bright grass green. You know, it's probably my favorite shade of green. It's kind of like that true green shade. You can build this up so it's a little bit brighter, but you can also diffuse it out so you get a little bit of softness. And it's a balanced green, which is really nice to see. Green is one of those shades that can either run a little bit too yellow or a little bit too blue. And it's not often that we see one that's kind of like that true balanced green. And I think SUQQU did a great job on that one. And then the last shade, that kind of chocolate brown with the green shimmer, I have to admit, I don't see a ton of shimmer in this. You can see a little bit when you pat it on with your finger, but even then it's not really that noticeable. It's kind of just like a little something to add some light reflection. But this actual shade I really love because it's kind of like that cooler chocolate brown, but if you look at it closely, it's almost like there's a touch of like a reddish purple in there as well, like a touch of that aubergine shade. And I just think it works really well to blend with other things and even just as a single eye look as well, because you can sheer this out and get it a little bit lighter. You could start it off a little bit smokier on the lash line and kind of soften it as you go up. It's just a very versatile shade. I love the tones of this one. So I have to say, I really love both of these eyeshadow palettes. And you know, I love them more than I expected to. These are definitely two great palettes, and you know, they're ones that are inspiring to use, particularly the 123 palette. I find that one with the different shades in there, I just find that one really inspiring to use. And as I was doing the eye swatches for that, I could really just, in my head, I just kept thinking of different ways that people could use that to make it, you know, work for either editorial looks or soft everyday looks. You know, it's just such a versatile palette. But let's go ahead and take a look at some comparisons now. We're going to start off actually with some shades from Surratt. So I've kind of come up with some shades that are going to give you a similar look to the 123 palette. So let's go ahead and take a look at these. And we're going to put them on my other arm so we can kind of compare. So for the shimmer shade, Surratt doesn't really have too many shimmers. This is going to be one of their hologram shades here, which if you put it on a base, you're going to get kind of this beautiful bright shade. But if you just use it lightly on its own, this one's called Cosmos, you can get kind of this shimmery effect. So that's going to be my comparison there with the shimmer, but you can see this is going to be a bright pink compared to kind of that soft shimmer there. Now, moving on to the next shade in the palette, I have two options. So this one here is called Ingenue, and this is one of my favorites. This one does have a subtle shimmer to it though. And so we have that. You can see this one's going to be a little bit cooler in tone, a little bit more pink. And then this is one of my favorite shades. This is actually my second one of these because this was a shade that I used to use all the time on its own. And this one here is Poudre. So you can see that the SUQQU shade is going to be a little bit deeper, and I'd say it's actually probably a little closer to Poudre, but I think they're both good options. And then look how close these yellows are. So this is Sarin from Surratt, and I think this was technically discontinued, but it does come back sometimes. You can see that Sarin's going to be a little bit brighter. It's not quite, there's like a little bit more like mustard in the SUQQU, whereas the Sarin's going to be a little brighter, but honestly, I think they're pretty darn close. And then for the aubergine shade, we have two. And this one here is Cle de Peau. This one is going to be a little bit deeper. It's more matte, but they're close. This one just has a little bit more of that like blue-based purple. And then this is Marron. And this one here is, in my opinion, slightly closer. But you can see it has a little bit more like chocolate in there, but it does have a little bit of shimmer, just like the SUQQU does. So let's take a look at my Surratt comparisons here for the 124 palette. And I have to say, these are not going to be as close, in my opinion. Just like with the 123 comparison, this is a hologram shade. This is called Aurora. This is going to give you kind of that minty green sparkle shade here. And you can see it's going to be a bit brighter as well. And yeah, you know, I think they're close, but this has a little bit more blue in it from Surratt versus the SUQQU shade. And then next up, we don't have a shade quite as mossy or spring green kind of mixed in. It's almost like pea soup kind of green as the SUQQU, but this is the shade Moss from Surratt. So this was my closest. And you can see this is going to be more of like that camo green kind of shade. So it's definitely going to be a lot dustier and so forth. For our more grass green here, the Surratt shade here is Envier. This has a little bit of shimmer, whereas the SUQQU really doesn't have shimmer in that shade. You can see that this one's going to have more blue in it. So it's more of a blue-green. And last up for our browns, we've got Chocolat Noir. And I love this shade. This is a really beautiful shade. And you can see this is going to be a little bit cooler in tone, a bit more brown-based than that in the SUQQU palette. So those are kind of my Surratt, kind of dupes. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some comparisons from SUQQU as well. And as I mentioned, I don't really have too many greens. This is the closest green. This is palette 121. So this actually just recently came out, limited edition. You can still find it in certain places, but you can see already that this one here is going to have, more shimmer and so forth. So let's go ahead and see how it compares to this grass green here. And you can see that on the skin, they are going to have a similarity. The 124 palette, this one's a little bit brighter and it doesn't have the shimmer that this one has. There's a little bit of kind of a golden green shimmer in the 121 palette, but those are going to be fairly close. Unfortunately, that is going to be my only comparison there for 124, but let's move on to 123. And I have a few that we're going to look at in here. So in this palette, this is palette 103. We're going to take a look at this shade and compare it to the Aubergine in 123. So here's that. You can see that this is going to have more brown there. And then this is palette 118. So let's take a look at the pink and the like yellowish gold here and see how those compare. So we've got these two. Let's put the pink up here. You can see that's going to be deeper. It's also more orangey. And here's that yellow, which again is actually going to be a bit more gold. There's a little bit more orange in that shade as well. And then we have palette 7 from SUQQU. So this is a permanent palette. And let's go ahead and compare. We'll compare everything except the gray here. So here are those three. We're going to put these right at the top. You can see that this deeper pink doesn't really go with anything here. This one actually, it's a warm pink, but it definitely has more pink than peach, whereas the shade in 123 has more peach. And this is going to be like a shimmery gold. And yeah, so I just, although it might look kind of similar in the pan, I think they're very different when you actually swatch those. So those are going to be my best comparisons for palettes 123 and 124. I have to say I really love both of these palettes. The Sunflower collection, all in all, I really like. I think these two eye bases, the Tone Touch eyes, I think these work really great as a complement to these palettes. I have to say, I think I'm going to be using the 112 a lot. The 113 is my favorite overall, but I think the 112 just works really nicely with these palettes as an eye base as well. The 113 I think is great when you add the shimmer on top and you still get to see a little bit of that brown through. So overall, I think that is great. I think they just work well together. On my lips, I have one of the new lipsticks from the line, and that is 116. So this came out in the collection as well. So here it is. You can see it's kind of like this orangey shade here, kind of like a subdued fiery orange. And I have it topped just a little bit with one of their new lip glosses. And this is shade 4. If you have not tried these SUQQU lip glosses, they are really nice. They're like the treatment lip. So I just dabbed a tiny bit of this on. You can see it's similar in color, but it has a little bit more brown, a little more terracotta than the lipstick. And yeah, overall, I have to say it's really great. If you missed part 1 of the collection, I'll leave the link to that down below in the description box. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And again, these items I picked up from Selfridges. They will be coming to other retailers in just a couple of weeks. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you very soon.